this one doesn't come off a little too half-assed because it's actually really last minute because I almost miscounted the number of weeks that were in this month because I was under the impression that I had the rest of December planned out, but I totally skipped one and had nothing in mind, so I just sort of threw this. The whole Mary Poppins lineup thing is actually kind of a coincidence, but so yeah, this is the one I decided on as kind of a last minute thing because, as I've said many times, I don't typically like doing the movie versus its sequel thing, but I needed something like right now, so this is what we've got. So they're based on the Nurse Matilda books, which I'm not really that familiar with, but what from very little I've gathered, and if the movies are anything to go off of, I sort of kind of get maybe like a little bit of a Roald Dahl vibe a little bit, particularly with the whole, there's this, big sense of wonderment, but also kind of has a bit of a dark edge to it also. So, yeah, so we'll go into the first one first, which, talking about that sort of, maybe not dark in the sense that I might mean more so when I say that, but it is interesting that this movie, this family movie that's going to be, this whole magical thing and have, dancing donkeys in it and all that, actually starts off with, like, the grieving process, because obviously with even family movies like this, usually there's at least one dead parent. And in the way that they're still kind of in the process of dealing with that when we meet them, particularly when it starts off with this Colin Firth narration where he's talking about the empty chair, and there's this whole poignancy going on where he's like talking to the chair as if his wife is still here, which is really a really effective way to start off to introduce the characters before we even get into the whole Nanny McPhee aspect. Like you get invested in it enough, you may almost forget that this movie has like magic and dancing animals and all that. People wearing a shitload of prosthetics and all that. But then this bleakness also kind of continues when you look at like the outlook that some of the kids have. Like Thomas Brody Sangster is obviously the kid that kind of gets the main focus. Interestingly enough, this is now the second movie where he has a dead mother that also has Emma Thompson and Colin Firth in it. And so the way he says the line, fathers all turn bad once their wives die, and how that's pretty much just his bleak outlook from now on. And it really kind of sets up that he's the one that's kind of the main troublemaker because this is the direction he's coming from. So his character can be easy to hate, but you kind of immediately know where he's coming from, so there is, something there. But the way also where the movie itself is obviously a fairy tale of sorts, but it's also kind of got this where basically fairy tales are what's scaring the children in regards to Colin Firth remarrying, especially so soon, because fairy tales have just introduced them to the concept of that never happens unless it's an evil stepmother. So it's almost like kind of an anti-fairy tale vibe it's got going on also, because you've also got the Kelly MacDonald character who kind of who's like uneducated and actually resents fairy tales in the way of she thinks that she'll never be able to sweep a dude off their feet because only the educated girls and the princess types are able to do that, and she's just a servant that can't read. But she's also kind of adds another layer to the sort of the realistic foundation of the characters. Also, even I know that's weird to say in a movie like this, but as far as like where the characters are coming from, especially the pain we kind of see her feel, where not only is she sort of resentful of that and feels kind of on the downside of that, but also how she actually genuinely loves the children, and they pretty much just rebuke her saying that by saying that she only says that because she's paid to, basically. And you can see that she's like genuinely hurt and kind of tries to get away from that, but but we all know where her character is going inevitably. That's just the case. And obviously she's got like this whole subplot that she's gonna have where she has to go off with Angela Lansbury, which really that whole subplot is worth it just for that final moment when Angela Lansbury's delivery of incest is like, it's worth seeing the whole movie, let alone that subplot. But obviously, what sets everything off is the arrival of Nanny McPhee, who is Emma Thompson, buried in makeup, which apparently it wasn't as long of a process as makeup tends to be, but it still definitely does a number on her for sure. It probably helps with the whole every time they reach a certain objective, she looks more and more like herself, losing the warts and then slowly de-uglifying as it goes on. And when she first shows up at the door, she's got like I said, this is kind of the dark element too, because all in all, it's definitely a good thing that Nanny McPhee shows up and they need her, but it is an interesting sort of look when she shows up and there's almost something evil about it. Like her silhouette in the door is sort of reminds me of like Cruella de Vil's entrance or something. Um, and there is something that almost seems a bit threatening about her, just in regards to how firm she is. But we all know it's just for the purpose of, it's what the kids need, basically. Because she is kind of all about the parents getting their alone time and their relaxation time and all that. So it's not like has this just constant overcast of, is this person trustworthy? No, she just knows what she has to do. But nevertheless, the movie does have like sort of a dark sense of humor. Kind of starting with Colin Firth's character being an undertaker. Just like he could have been any other profession. So we get some gold scenes like when he's just talking to a corpse and he's trying to find a wife in the next 30 days, and the thought that crosses his mind is, hey, I wonder if this guy's wife's available. Of course she's available now, so uh, so scenes like that do work. And then there's also stuff where it almost goes surprisingly far in regards to what Nanny McPhee will do to teach them something. Like, for instance, if they're going to fake sick and fake the measles and all that to get out of doing whatever, she'll just make them sick for real. And then make them have to drink this nasty-ass medicine that looks like toxic waste in order to fix themselves. Um, and stuff like that really does go a long way for stuff like this and makes it feel a bit more fresh and different from what they probably could have done with this kind of material. Maybe made it a bit more sort of, I don't know, light, I guess. I mean, it is light as is, really. I don't want to blow out of proportion the dark segments of it or anything, but still. Um, but then there's also, those moments where it does really find a serious place. Like, not just at the beginning when they're in the grieving process, but, like, kind of towards the end, too. When we watch, we know it's kind of inevitably coming, but we don't really realize the heaviness of it until we're actually watching it. The scene where Colin Firth, the single dad whose wife has just died, has to sit down with like his 7 children and explain to them, by the way, we're broke and I can't support you, and I'm at the mercy of Angela Lansbury, who hates me and I hate as well. And you all hate too. And it's this really broken place that this dude obviously has to be in, that really makes you feel for him in a way, and obviously in a sense makes you feel for everybody. Especially with how easily they see what the problem is and decide to fix it right away instead of sort of wallowing in it, which is really nice. So another thing you'll notice that really, really stands out about this movie that's just insane is the production design. I really like to think the production design would have gotten some Oscar attention if it weren't for the fact that the movie came out in January. Because I think it had just had its UK release that December, but they waited till January to bring it out here. And the use of color also, because you'll look like the scene when Nanny McPhee's first at the door and like everything is blue, like the walls are blue and the lights are blue, and there's sort of the dark area where the door is sort of has that vibe to it. But then you have scenes like in Colin Firth's office where like everything is green, like the walls are green and the lamps are green. He's got his green jacket, and just stuff like that really makes just everything you're looking at sort of stand out, and really shows like a precision in like every frame. So that's really greatly appreciated also. But then it's also kind of this contrast where you have all that color and all these different scenes, but then when the kids go up to see Nanny McPhee where her room is and where that hallway is, and it's like everything's like drab and everything's dark, and it's like just this basic brown attic of sorts, and how it's this is the character that's sort of bringing all this life to their story, yet she's the one that's kind of in this sort of boxed off drabness in the house. Has always been kind of an interesting contrast to me. Um, if there is, one particular problem, it's got to be there's some pretty shoddy effects here. However, this probably is one of those movies where you kind of have to wonder if that's on purpose or not, where it does kind of, like I said, have that sort of storybook feel to it, and it's like maybe they wanted it to feel sort of like if you must compare it to Mary Poppins, how they just had animation in it, and it's like if it's maybe possibly going for that sort of thing, I don't know. But interestingly enough, for the kind of movie this is, especially if you look at like what it would do today, it was made for like very little. I think the budget was like 25 million or something, and for a movie like this, that's like minuscule, which is crazy. So, like I said, especially by today's standards, I can't imagine what it would be made for now. But um, even so, as I said, we do have like the dancing donkey. Not only is it kind of a ridiculous scene, but it looks very fake also. Or like I said, the same with the medicine. It just looks like this poorly CGI blob in a spoon. But like I said, it's hard to tell if that's intentional or not to go with the whole feel of it. But yeah, and I guess I mean I talk shit on the dancing donkey thing, but I guess maybe it works as kind of a nice balance to like just having something that goofy sort of balance out the really serious subject matter, like the broken down dad and the grieving process and all that. So in that case, I can appreciate it enough. Though I'm sure they could have done that in other ways, but a dancing donkey in women's clothes, fine, I guess. Um, so yeah, and of course, when we get to the end, there is because it's one of those cases where you pretty, as I was talking about with Kelly MacDonald, you pretty much know what the ending is in the first 10 or 15 minutes or so. But number one, it is how you get there, but also it is sort of like taking on that where I was talking about how it's interestingly it's an anti fairy tale, but a fairy tale at the same time. So of course it has to have the fairy tale ending, but once it gets there, it's just big and magical and colorful enough that it works anyway, with all the snow and all that, and well, I would say maybe Colin Firth slapping Miss Quickly upside the head and knocking her over might not fly. No, but really, it's kind of weird that it didn't. Nobody really thought about that then. But apart from that, it's yeah. They do go for that whole magical conclusion, and it does work, and it is nice to see Kelly MacDonald end up happy also, because we felt for her just as much as we felt for all the other characters also. Even though she disappears halfway through, she still leaves an impression. Um, I do think that this. I'm not even quite sure what it was, but I remember that I really, really liked this a lot when it first came out. Like, the first time I saw it, I, like, really, really loved it. And I would have been, like, 15, I think. So, I, I, I don't feel that now. And like I said, watching it back, I'm not quite sure what exactly it was about it that made me feel that passionate about it, because I don't feel it now. But it's still, very nice. It's not like I liked it and now I don't. It's just, I wish I kind of had that same feeling about it I did when I first saw it, but somewhere along the way it kind of faded away, but it's still fine, so there's that. But obviously, it's always going to have looming over it the whole being in Mary Poppins' shadow thing, how the second you lay eyes on this movie, where you're seeing it the first time or the fifth time, it's like, yeah, it's obviously trying to go for a Mary Poppins vibe that it's not quite reaching. Even the comment on the cover, the new Mary Poppins says Melanie Moon of WBTV. Yeah, I don't know who Melanie Moon is, but I guarantee whichever critic got to that line first was going to make this cover. It didn't matter what their name was or where they were coming from or who they worked for. They were getting that comment on the cover no matter what. And yeah, they certainly did their best there also. I did mention that Emma Thompson wrote these two, right? I was going to do that at the beginning, and I think I forgot, but Emma Thompson wrote these as well. Obviously coming off her, well, no, obviously it was like 10 years before, but her Oscar win for writing Sense and Sensibility, which I was reading somewhere, it took her like 5 years or something to write Sense and Sensibility. And it took her like 9 years to write this, and I think she was writing the sequel like maybe 4 years before it was actually made, 3 years before it was made or something. So she's obviously very meticulous, and that can show. Um, but like I said, it has its great stuff and it's got its weaknesses, as does the second one, Nanny McPhee Returns, or as I think it's most popularly known, Nanny McPhee and the Big Bang. But they had to make that a bit more bland when they sent it over here. Uh, so what we have here is I do actually like that they tried to almost keep it like a tradition at the start, where at the beginning of the first movie it's Colin Firth narrating, and it's him saying, hey, this is why our lives are fucked. We lost this, we don't have this, and Maggie Gyllenhaal's doing the same thing. It's like a tradition now of the parent narrating the beginning and saying, what's wrong and how they're gonna like lose half the farm because Reese Ifans is an idiot, and Ewan McGregor's gone off to war and now he's missing, and they're not getting responses back and all that. And she's left raising them, all these hellions. So some of which aren't even all hers. Some of them are like nieces and nephews too. So but I do like that it does have like that sort of fun with those elements from the first movie and sort of bringing them back. Kind of like when the fake out when we think Nanny McPhee's at the door the first time, because it plays out exactly like the first one did, and it's just Reese Ifans in a raincoat. Is really nicely done. And then when they do it again almost immediately and it is finally her, it is really funny. So, and it kind of a nice entrance too, even though they kind of use it as a punchline at first. Um, but yeah, so our parent now is Maggie Gyllenhaal, who I've actually heard a lot that if there's like one American actress that gets a lot of praise for her British accent, because that's something that doesn't typically happen, it's Maggie Gyllenhaal. So she gets to play with that a little bit. But as far as the rest of the movie, it is like, and like I said, even though it does kind of have that humor sort of about itself, like it's almost making fun of itself when you look back at some of the things they bring back from the first movie, you'll probably mainly notice that there's like, there's a big difference in appearance. Because I was talking about, the production design and all the color and all that. This one doesn't really have that much at all. It's mostly, like, it's rarely indoors, and when they're outdoors, it's just like, fields. That was one thing I also wanted to mention about the first one, how that's actually equally impressive, because I believe the scenario was the sets were like just like empty fields that were like mud, and everything in the first movie, whether like all the sets and all the way down to the trees, all had to be built. So that just makes that even better. But here they kind of just stuck with the field vibe without building a whole lot around it. Um, but the thing you'll also notice, not only about like the change in look and like the lack of the visual gloriousness that the first one had, and where this one's just kind of generic by comparison aesthetically, the director's changed. But the really interesting thing is you look at Kirk Jones, who directed the first movie, and how you would think maybe he would have the better filmography when you say this one's sort of generic and bland by comparison as far as the appearance. Well, Kirk Jones would go on to do My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2 and like What to Expect When You're Expecting. So you can see there's a big difference here. And then you've got Susanna White is the director of this, and she just going into this, she already had Generation Kill to her name, like the 4 episodes, and then she would go on to do like Parade's End and stuff like that. So it's like the movie with sort of the blander direction has the director with the much more notable filmography. Weirdly enough. So we'll say the production designers are basically the stars of this movie, I guess. So going on that, it does have like a bit. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to play up that the first movie didn't have a bunch of silly stuff in it. I already talked about my opinion on the dancing donkey, among many other things. But this one does feel a bit more, I guess, almost childlike in its humor. Like, there's a lot of adults bumbling around. There's people falling backwards into water and all that. You got, Rhys Ifans running around. Ifans in this movie reminds me a lot of Edgar from the Aristocats. Whether that's a compliment or not, I guess depends on the person, but I'll just say that. And then you've got the scene. He does have funny scenes though, like the scene where he runs into Bill Bailey, who's playing Farmer McCready, is really funny also. But it does also kind of have those bit of dark directions in it sometimes. Also, like going on Rhys Ifans again, the girls that keep trying to get him to pay his debt. And the first thing they're talking about is that if you don't do this, we're going to take your kidneys. And then by the end of the movie, we're not just going to take your kidneys, we're going to kill you and stuff you and leave you in the casino and tell gamblers this is what happens. It's like, holy shit. And it's like, if the whole movie kind of had that much darker of a sense of humor, it probably could have been something entirely different and probably better. But I do get the idea of, taking it more in a family-friendly direction, probably even more so than the first movie, at least in regards to how its humor goes, but that's not to say that it doesn't, really work its dramatic moments also, because you do have the scene where they get the news that Ewan McGregor might have been killed, and how downplayed they play it feels quite real. Maggie Gyllenhaal's like amazing in this scene, the way she just doesn't go over the top at all, but just kind of caves inside. Which is really well done. And then the scene afterwards where Norman and Cyril were discussing this, and it's like the most human we've ever seen Cyril act up to this point, until the fine scene shortly after. And it does, you could say that after they played that up so well that they kind of copped out. Obviously with the whole, oh no, like Asa Butterfield like immediately believes that he's not dead, and he's like, no, I feel it, he's alive. And it's like, oh, yep, he's just missing in action. Sorry about that, Rhys Ifans messed with stuff. So, that might seem like a bit of a cop-out, especially when you look at how much about, grieving and, losing a loved one the first movie was about. I do kind of think that there is something there where it's like kind of a nice counter. Not only that, but it also kind of avoids redundancy also, because it could have been like, oh, we're dealing with another dead parent, just like the first movie. But you could also say that, and maybe it's a bad message to kids. It's just like, you learn of your father's potential death. If you just say, oh, I feel it in my bones, he's alive, that means he's gonna be. But I do think it's a nice counter to what the first movie was doing, where the first movie did fully embrace the whole grieving a parent thing, whereas this one sort of tackles, like, hope, to kind of counter that a little bit. So I think that ends up working in its favor, despite what it might look like on the surface. And then, yeah, you obviously also get this fine scene, which is kind of a nice dramatic moment also, where it's, particularly the scene where Norman actually stands up to him, like after we've had the whole intimidating, guard and all that. He just goes right in, and like when he starts shit-talking Ewan McGregor, Norman just immediately stands up to him, which is really cool, especially for his character, and then the way Fiennes reacts to it also, especially with the vibe we get from Fiennes when we see how timid Cyril is around him, because Cyril's like his actual child, and he's the one that's been like the most misbehaved child, and we kind of see where that's probably coming from when we see his interaction with Fiennes. So it's all comes around in this nice little poignant scene between the three of them also. So Fiennes is a bit more than just cameo number 2, which I really liked also. Like his character really has a purpose, and I like that they went as far as to cast him to show you right away that this character's going to have a purpose. But once again, we do have some downsides. We've got some more shoddy CGI. Once again, maybe on purpose, maybe not. It's hard to tell. Like, you got the baby elephant that is so... apparently the baby elephant, there's a reason for. Apparently, if what I read is correct, they actually did have a real elephant on the set, but apparently it, like, contracted a virus and died. And they kind of had to last minute just do a CGI one. I know it's terrible, but yeah, you can tell how animated it is, especially when Thompson goes to, like, touch it, and it's like you can just tell there's no contact here with anything real. And then you've also got the pigs. The pigs, which are also kind of like basically this movie's version of the dancing donkey. But this scene is a lot more like fun and imaginative with them doing the synchronized swimming and all that. Maybe it's a bit sillier, sure, but it's much cooler looking and much more fun. So there is that. Though I do think they probably put all their CGI budget into just that one shot of the pig winking so that they can put it in all the trailers. So there's that. Um, but apart from that, there's also like the child actors here. Like I said, Asa Butterfield is Norman, who would go right from this into Hugo with Scorsese. So obviously he's still going places now. But every now and then you've got like the girl playing Celia is like, she's not bad or anything, but there's like so many scenes where you can like see her trying. It seems like she's trying not to crack a smile, especially in the scene when Celia's like eating chocolate or whatever, and he pukes in the car, and he pukes on her, and she just starts hitting him, and she's supposed to be like super angry, but her line's gonna get cut off when she sees something, and you can just tell that she's like halfway breaking when she's supposed to be super angry. I know you don't want to, nitpick child actors too much, especially ones that don't have extensive filmographies, but still, it's noticeable. I will say, though, I do think the kids in this one are much more distinct than the ones in the first movie. Like I was talking about, Thomas Brody Sangster basically being the main one. He's really the only one you remember what the hell that he even does. The other kids in the other movie just kind of all blend together, boys and girls, and it's just kind of this one hectic mess whenever the children are in a scene. They definitely have much more distinct personalities in this one, and you kind of, especially when they spend the second half of the movie sort of split apart too, I think helps a lot too. So I do give them credit for that, even if sometimes the acting might be a bit shaky. But and we are treated to some pleasantries, like being introduced to the whole barn scene with shots of a cow gruesomely shitting everywhere. Then there's another cow shit scene where Maggie Smith insists, two-time Oscar winner Maggie Smith decides that she's gonna sit knowingly in a pile of cow shit because it's comfortable. It looks comfortable. So that scene's in here too. Like I said, its humor does maybe go in a bit more of a childlike direction than the first movie, but even so, it is a family movie in the long run. So I'm not sure what I'm really faulting anyway. And then, of course, we do get to an ending, not quite as magical as the ending of the first movie. We've got the whole bomb thing, which Aggie's husband obviously alludes to when he tells the story around the middle, but it still kind of feels like a bit of an afterthought when the ending is suddenly them defusing a bomb. It just kind of feels from out of nowhere, even though we got the story in the middle, and they're in wartime, but, whatever. But there's also a lot going on here that's really nice. Like the whole idea of Maggie Smith being Aggie, the baby from the first movie, is a really nice touch, because I think the first movie is, the 1860s, and then obviously this is World War II, so it lines up really nicely. And then the big scene with, Ewan McGregor's return, because I was talking about some of that earlier, but it's like, it is like this really big emotional moment. It's like, even though we don't really know his character very well, we know enough. We've only seen him like in one flashback scene where he had no lines. But it's not really about him. It's about how they feel, like, with his presence missing, and how we know how much they need him and how much they miss him and all that. So it is this really, big emotional moment when he gets there also. And then, of course, the scenes in both movies where Nanny McPhee finally becomes Emma Thompson because she's completed these children. So it is still really nice anyway. They were planning a third, but the box office just like crashed and exploded. I don't even remember, like, the first movie felt so mainstream and like it was this big deal. I don't remember the second one even being in theaters around here. So I'm not sure if it was a distribution thing or what the hell happened, but long story short, it did not make the money it needed to make a third movie. So, yeah, but I don't know that we needed a third one anyway. I'm a little curious what her ideas would have been, but I think this is fine as is. So, So all in all, I do prefer the first movie, I think. But there are many ways both are better. But I think really just the whole visual thing the first movie's got going on is kind of what stands out to me the most, even if the second one kind of has some, not, no, I got necessarily not stronger, but really strong character work. But like I said, the first one really does too, especially the way it tackles the grieving process and Colin Firth's character and Kelly MacDonald's characters and all that. So yeah, but the kids are infinitely stronger in the second one, so there is that. So yeah, so that's what this one is. The next one is going to be the one I was talking about before, where it's a movie from the '90s and a movie from the '40s, and we're gonna keep with the Christmas vibe and all that. And then the last one's gonna be another sort of novel adaptations. You'll see. It'll be obvious when you see it. So yeah, and you know all the other stuff coming. So until all that, that's it for this.